Chapter 6, Year 3, Part 3. The week after the Christmas holidays, Professor Lupin invited Harry for his first Patronus lesson. Harry turned up a little early, but waited barely 5 minutes before Lupin arrived, carrying a large packing case. "Good evening, Harry," the man said pleasantly. "I've brought a boggart, found it in Mr. Filch's filing cabinet. If it does turn into a Dementor upon seeing you, our job will become significantly easier." "I understand, Professor." "So," Lupin nodded, seeing that Harry already had his wand out. "The spell I'm going to try and teach you is highly advanced magic, well beyond the owl requirements. It's called the Patronus charm." "I know, sir," Harry said. When the Professor's eyebrows rose, he elaborated. "I've researched it, before I went to see you last time." Lupin appeared to be surprised. "You have? Oh, that's very diligent of you. I trust that you don't need basic explanations, then?" "No, Professor." The man was considering Harry as if he was trying and failing to fit him into a formula of some sort. "Have you maybe even practiced the charm?" Lupin inquired cautiously. "Yes, Professor." "Well," the teacher stepped away and made a sweeping gesture with his arm. "Would you mind demonstrating for me, then? Without a Dementor?" Harry inhaled deeply. This always took quite a bit of effort from him, but unless he was mistaken, Lupin was about to be impressed. "Expecto Patronum!" A silver stag erupted from Harry's wand. Harry bit his lip, trying to maintain concentration, but had to give up after a couple of seconds. I can't keep it going for very long, but—" The expression on Lupin's face was priceless. He seemed to have turned into a stone statue and was staring at the place the stag had vanished from with eyes round from shock. Professor? That was amazing, Harry, that you're capable of. It's very advanced magic. Well, I have been practicing all the time for the last 2 months, Harry pointed out. Besides, I don't know what I'll be able to do against a Dementor. Maybe this is useless. Oh, no! Lupin came to life abruptly. He looked almost proud as he gazed at Harry. "It's not useless. It's fantastic that you have that sort of focus and concentration. It means you've already mastered that part. It's going to be very different with a Dementor, but I'm convinced you can do it with time, Harry. Just don't get upset if it doesn't happen on the first try." Harry nodded obediently, and yet he was very upset when it really did not happen on the first try. He'd hoped irrationally that his Patronus would work against a Dementor, but there was only a wisp of white smoke and "Please not, Harry!" and chocolate, once Lupin had helped him get up. "Really, Harry, don't worry about it," the teacher reassured him. "Half of your job is done. You just need to work at it, and eventually you'll get it." Harry smiled politely and agreed, but he still insisted on practicing until Lupin had to pretty much bodily remove him from the defense classroom. "Maybe we should post it somewhere that you're a Slytherin," Neville said darkly. He was still trembling a little from his grand's howler about forgetting passwords and endangering classmates. "So that Sirius Black would just stop trying to get into Gryffindor." Harry shot him an incredulous glance. "And lay siege to the Slytherin dorms instead? Thanks, Nev." "Personally, I find it quite hilarious," Blaise said, catching up to them in the corridor. "All the Gryffindor blood spilled for nothing." Neville blanched. "There has been no blood," Harry sighed impatiently. "But Sirius Black did nearly stab Ron Weasley to death, right in our dorm," Neville protested. Harry silenced Blaise with a look. He'd learned that one from Millie. It was a speak and you die a painful death sort of look, which Harry thought he pulled off rather well. "Ron is really annoying now, too," Neville continued. "He won't stop talking about the attack and how brave he's been, and he's on Hermione's case for her cat eating his rat. Not like it's Hermione's fault, and everyone is angry with me for losing the passwords." He trailed off miserably. It sounded like life in Gryffindor was not fun for Neville or Hermione right now. "Well, at least I should have some time over the weekend to help you with potions," Harry said, changing the topic drastically. "Oh, good," Neville brightened. "I really can't keep on failing miserably, seeing as it's February already. I don't understand how you can be so good at it." Harry chose not to mention that he got so good at potions because of Neville. "Then again, Professor Snape is not as mean to you as he is to me," Neville added gloomily. "Well, that's probably because I keep a low profile both in and out of class," Harry shrugged. "Not much to be mean to me for, is there?" Harry must have jinxed his luck right then, because Snape made him stay back after the potions lesson for the first time in his Hogwarts career the very next day. Apparently, the professor had found out about the private training Harry was getting from Lupin, and he was positively furious. "First you pull that stunt with Gryffindor's sword, now you ingratiate yourself with Lupin. Some Slytherin you are, Potter." Harry unwisely tried to argue. "Sir, I didn't realize it was wrong to come to a teacher with a problem." "But of course you had to choose that teacher, didn't you?" There were twin spots of colour on Snape's sallow cheeks, and his black eyes were narrowed in anger. "Out of all the teachers in this school, you turned to that inhuman creature." Harry felt that his head of house was being quite unreasonable. "With all due respect, sir, he's the defence professor, and I've noticed nothing inhuman about him." Snape raised an eyebrow. How he managed to make the gesture so malicious, Harry didn't know, but he had to contain the urge to step back. "Well, that's odd, isn't it, Potter, considering that Lupin is a werewolf?" And then seeing the incredulity on Harry's face. "What? Did noble Lupin confide in you? How clumsy of me. I seem to have exposed his secret." Harry was staring at Snape. "Professor Lupin's... he's not..." "Don't you try to tell me what he is and what he is not," the potions master hissed, and this time Harry did actually back away a little. "Haven't you noticed the way Lupin tends to fall conveniently ill during full moon? No. I take it you did not complete the essay on werewolves I'd assigned, Potter. Lupin was in a hurry to cancel that piece of homework, was he not?" "Well, yes, but..." Professor Lupin was so mild-mannered, soft-spoken. A werewolf? Harry would be looking into those lunar charts to see whether they matched Lupin's absences, because he sure as hell wasn't taking Snape at his word. At the same time, would he really lie about something that was not very hard to check? Well, if it was true, it might explain why Harry always felt that Lupin was hiding something. What was Dumbledore thinking, if he had indeed hired a werewolf? How did they control him? Who would be answerable if Lupin bit someone despite, Harry was sure, the best of intentions? The headmaster? Tends to believe in the goodness of humans, even of those who are not exactly human. Snape's eyes were shadowed as he said that. Harry felt lost. He wasn't sure he'd be comfortable going back to Lupin's classroom if the teacher actually did turn out to be a werewolf, liable to eat him when the moon turned round. But he was not going to let the lesson stop. Lupin did not seem dangerous, and Harry was getting better and better at producing a real Patronus with the boggart Dementor. It had taken him a long while. He'd heard the deaths of his parents from the moment Voldemort had stepped through their door numerous times, and he wasn't giving up now after putting himself through that. "I'm sorry, sir, but my meetings with Professor Lupin are important, even if he might be a..." Harry shook his head. "Werewolf. His defense, Professor. Assuming it was true, what was Lupin going to do? Give the class a lecture on the best way to kill their teacher?" The Slytherin head of house observed Harry for a long moment, face obscured by a long curtain of greasy hair. Harry tried not to squirm under his heavy gaze. "Do you, Potter, also share the Gryffindor trust in all and sundry? Do you believe that people are inherently good and nobody can possibly harm you?" "Of course not, sir." "Do you agree that Lupin is dangerous?" Appearances aside, he could be, sir. "And yet you are planning to persist in this foolishness." Snape gave an ugly sneer. "Does Lupin feed you cakes, Potter? Does he pat you on the head and listen to your woes? Does he promise to rescue you from evil Slytherins?" Harry bristled. "I don't think that Slytherins are evil," he said, gritting his teeth. and no adult had ever fed him cakes or patted him on the head or listened to his woes. So Snape could cut the patronizing act. "Slytherins are also not witless, which you unfortunately are, Potter. Get out of my sight. You're working with Longbottom again next week." All in all, Harry was left deeply unsettled by the whole discussion, and not just because he'd found out that his defence teacher and Patronus tutor was allegedly a werewolf. But this was also the longest conversation Harry had ever had with his head of house. It provided Harry with a lot to think about, and he decided that it would be prudent to give Professor Snape a wide berth for a while. The professor had always been annoyingly condescending, antagonistic, and unjust, but that was all right as long as he didn't actively try to harm Harry. Harry was, however, getting the distinct impression that he'd been treading on a knife's edge with the man ever since getting sorted into Slytherin, and he did not want to lose his balance. Hermione was fidgeting. It wasn't in her nature to fidget. When Hermione was in the library, she might mutter under her breath, or scribble something frantically, or sit engrossed in a book, but such a level of distraction was unusual. Harry sighed and looked around to check that no one was listening. Madame Pin seemed to be preoccupied with sorting several incunabula. No students were in sight. "Hermione? We're okay, right?" Hermione gave him an uncertain smile. "Of course." They'd had a bit of falling out last week, when Harry and Neville finally confirmed once and for all that Hermione was using a time-turner to get to all her classes. They'd been watching her in arithmancy and divination, both of which Hermione attended at the exact same time. In such a situation it would be easiest for her to slip up. They'd noticed that she occasionally fiddled with something on her neck after one of the classes, but never after both. From there it was part research, part badgering Hermione, but Neville turned out to have been right all along. Hermione was in possession of a time-turner. "Professor McGonagall got a special permission for me to use one, but it's supposed to be a secret, so don't tell anyone you've figured it out, or I will get in trouble." And Harry hadn't meant to have an argument with her about it. It was her business, after all. However, he failed to see what entitled Hermione, out of all the students at Hogwarts, to a time-turner, because taking Muggle studies did not seem like a valid enough reason to be granted one. And his incomprehension was, of course, his own problem, and he'd get over it. But then Hermione gave him the "I deserved it on my own merits" spiel, which did annoy him. Because, yes, Hermione was clever, but she wasn't the only clever student in Hogwarts, and it seemed pretty obvious to Harry that she got the time-turner for being a teacher's pet and McGonagall's personal project. Not that there was anything wrong with that. Harry would have agreed to a time-turner too in her place. Hermione, on the other hand, kept insisting that it was already mid-March, and she hadn't caused a time paradox yet, which meant that she had to be worthy. And Harry could not explain to her that causing a time paradox figured very little into why he was peeved, so he left the matter alone. Things had been strained for a week. Now, when Neville wasn't around to act as a buffer, the elephant in the room was getting increasingly harder to ignore. "Look, it's not that I'm angry at you for using the time-turner. Not at all, really." "No, I think I understand," Hermione said, interrupting him. "It's just, I don't like it when you compare me to them." Harry blinked. "Them?" he repeated. "Yes, them. Those purebloods. It's enough for Malfoy to say his name, and he's suddenly somebody without having to do anything to deserve it. I'm not like them, Harry. I work hard for every grade I receive. I don't have a flashy surname. Everything I've achieved, I've done it through my own effort." "Of course," Harry agreed. But it's not like the purebloods get good grades just for existing. Look at Neville in potions." Hermione waved an impatient hand. "I don't mean grades, but the wizarding world is so insular. All the purebloods know each other, and at least of each other. And if you're not in that circle, you don't mean anything to them. And if you work hard to be acknowledged, like I have, they just scoff at you and tell you you're a know-it-all with mud for blood. I mean, even your friend Zabini can't stand me." "Blaise doesn't like muggles or muggle-borns," Harry shrugged. "And I don't think he's right, but you don't seem to like purebloods, which isn't fair either." Hermione deflated a little. "It's not that I don't like purebloods," she said. "It's foolish attaching a label like that. Neville is not like Malfoy. At the same time, though, I don't understand them. They seem to speak in code half of the time. It's as if their whole world is an inside joke. Family names are one of those things. Even to Neville, even to Ron Weasley, you can say, I don't know, Bulstrode, and they will tell you, oh, yes, one of those. And if you belong, then you know which those it is, and if you don't, you don't. And everyone knows that you don't know, and then treat you as a foreigner of some sort. I mean, do you see what I'm talking about? Yes. Oh, Harry saw. Maybe it was by virtue of being in Slytherin, but he'd realized this a very long time ago, and had learned to act accordingly. Then Hermione's eyes were wide, eager. How do you cope? I mean, if you don't know their secret code either, then how do you blend in so well? Harry scrunched up his nose. This was really awkward, but... Hermione, they usually forget that I don't know the code. When Hermione didn't seem to catch his meaning, he went on. I'm the boy who lived, and a Potter. They take it for granted a lot of the time that I would know what they do. Hermione frowned. So really, having a fleshy name is the only way to get past the velvet ropes. Well, the purebloods might not accept you into their circle, but being accepted there is not the only way to become a part of this world. I hate it that some people will always see me as a second-class citizen, Hermione said flatly. But I'm not going to let them intimidate me. I have as much right to be here as they do. Maybe Harry had been surrounded by purebloods for much too long, but he could hear Blaze's voice running a counter-argument in his head. Excuse me, but we have infinitely more right to be here, since this is our world. Take your whining somewhere else if you don't like it. He figured this wasn't the time or the place to play devil's advocate, however. He wondered also whether it wasn't the determination to always stand up for her beliefs that had landed Hermione in Gryffindor instead of Ravenclaw. He could definitely see her starting up some sort of a commission for the rights of Muggle-born children one day. Oh, and before you go, Harry, look what I found in me house. Harry didn't bother to hide his incomprehension. A rat? That was special or hygienic in what way? Not just any rat, Harry. Ron Weasley's rat. Hagrid smiled. He lost it, you see, and I thought your friend Hermione's cat ate it back in February, and it's already June, but here it is. You don't mind taking it back to him for me, do you? Harry did mind, actually. Although Ron Weasley had undergone some attitude adjustment in the wake of his sister's trip to the Chamber of Secrets, he and Harry were still not on speaking terms, or nodding terms, or waving, or greeting-exchanging terms, really. Hagrid was looking at him expectantly. Oh, fine, Harry acquiesced. Good of you, Harry. Now off you go, it's getting close to curfew, Hagrid admonished, opening the cabin door. And thank you for coming to see me. Harry smiled at Hagrid absent-mindedly, trying to keep hold of the squirming rat. Bye, Hagrid. Do you even want to be taken to your master, you ugly creature? The rat squeaked and squirmed some more. If you don't quit it, I'll feed you to a snake and say you've run away, Harry told it conversationally. I'm a parcel-moth. I can call lots of hungry snakes here. I don't really care whether or not Weasley gets you back, you know. Amazingly enough, that threat actually worked. The rat gave one last terrified squeal and subsided. Harry halted his steps to stare at the rodent. Did he speak some other animal language, like the rat equivalent of Parseltongue? Because this was kind of disturbing. And then, all of a sudden, Harry felt movement behind him, and something slammed into him. Hard. Harry hit the ground, squeezing the rat tightly in one hand, and trying to draw his wand with the other. What was... He turned to see a gigantic black dog looming over him, fangs bared, breath foul. Petrie! The dog jumped out of the way, and Ficus totalus missed it completely. But while Harry was finishing the incantation, the dog had morphed into a man with a long, gaunt face and filthy hair. Harry's mouth went dry with fear. This was Sirius Black, right next to him, and he aimed his wand. "Don't look at me like that," Black demanded, stepping closer still. "I deserve your anger, but Harry, you've got to give Peter to me, you fucking traitor. Just give him to me, Harry," Black snarled, reaching out to Harry. Harry could hardly understand him, blindsided as he was. He was laughing, Potter. He was happy he'd betrayed your parents, your own godfather, Potter. How does that feel? Harry's shock was abruptly replaced by fury. He focused on it, basked in it, channeled it into his wand when he fired the next hex. He was going to kill the bastard. But Black dodged again, and he seemed a little impatient now. "Harry, I won't harm you. You don't believe I'll harm you. Just give me fucking Peter." And the rat was squirming, and the murderer was raving, and Harry was shouting, "I'll kill you, you fucker! But Black's own wand was already in his hand. He barked an "Expelliarmus!" sending Harry sprawling again, and ripping the wand from his grasp. "Give me the rat, Harry." Black's voice sounded oddly sane all of a sudden. Harry looked down dumbly at the rat he was squeezing to death in his left hand. This rat?" "Yes, Harry, I want this rat. Now give him to me." The crazed murderer was aiming Harry's own wand at him. For a moment Harry just wanted to leap and claw at his face and bite and kick. As soon as they performed the charm, he went to the Dark Lord and spilled the beans. Then, whoops, your parents are dead. Very tragic, don't you find, Potter? "One day I'll hunt you down and kill you," he snarled, flinging the rat at Black's face. The man caught the rodent with a half-giddy, half-vicious expression on his face. "Fine, kill me, but I get to kill him first," he said, and transformed back into a dog. Harry's wand fell onto the grass, unheeded. Harry dove for it, hoping to fire a spell at the dog's back, but it had already bounded away with its prey behind its teeth, and disappeared from view behind a large tree. Harry was left sitting on the ground alone, feeling strangely empty for being so furious still. He felt like he'd lived a lifetime since Black had attacked him, but he knew that, really, hardly 5 minutes had gone by. But these 5 minutes... Harry clenched his jaw. He'd dreamt about this moment. He'd fantasized about facing Black and destroying him, incapacitating him, and then delivering a speech on how he'd make him suffer, and how he hated, loathed him. He'd known Black was a murderer and a dark wizard from the House of Black, but Harry had defeated a basilisk, managed to scare even some older Slytherins, perfected a corporeal Patronus, something that was beyond many wizards. He'd thought himself capable. He'd thought that when the time came, he'd be able to exact revenge, to hold his own, to win. Damn it! But it had all come to nothing. To sit on the grass with a wooden stick in his hand and listening to the sound of his illusions shattering. None of his lessons had prepared him for this, for looking the murderer of his parents in the eye and realizing that he couldn't do a thing. "I meant what I said," he whispered brokenly. "I hope you fucking die, and I hope I'll be the one who kills you." And yet the words rang hollow. Harry had failed to back them up just a short while ago. Instead of a glorious confrontation, there had been a humiliating defeat. Why? Why did it have to be that way? Because I was a fucking idiot, Harry thought harshly. Gritting his teeth, he swore that he'd never, ever make the mistake of overestimating himself like that again. He was clearly not good enough to fight Black now, but... damn it, he would train, and he would prepare, and he would get strong, and then he'd become someone his enemies would fear. For now, though... Harry sighed and got up, wincing at his bruises. He was still alive after a run-in with Sirius Black. That was good. Life did not end here. He'd just have to face it like always, suck it up, and keep going. No matter how much he wanted to just curl into a ball and pretend none of this had ever happened. He'd have to tell someone about it, though. He'd report the bloody sighting of Sirius Black. Maybe that would help with getting him back into jail. Chances were it wouldn't, of course. The school was so awesomely protected that a deranged maniac could get in through all the wards, and an army of dementors. He'd done it several times, in fact, all without getting caught. Harry stalked towards the castle entrance, fuming afresh. There were not many people in Hogwarts Hall at this time. It was almost curfew, after all, and Harry's legs took him to Lupin's office quite independently of his brain. He stared at the office door for a while, and then he knocked. "Harry?" Professor Lupin looked rather pale and ill, but Harry paid no heed. "Sirius Black is here," he said without preamble, and watched Lupin's face blanch. "He's just attacked me." "But you are—" "He's insane," Harry bit out. "He only wanted a rat, and then he escaped. He's an animagus, by the way." "Come in, Harry." "No." Harry found it very hard to stay within the limits of common politeness. "I just came to tell you that Sirius Black is on Hogwarts grounds. Aren't you going to—" "Wait, Harry, did you say he wanted a rat?" Harry scowled. "Yes." "Did he say anything about it?" Not sure. He kept ranting about some Peter. Lupin's face went impossibly even paler. He seemed to take a couple of moments to compose himself. And tonight of all nights, holy mother of... Forgive me, Harry, I'm a little out of sorts. Are you sure he said Peter? Yes. Well, he might be delusional. It's best to inform Dumbledore in any case. Oh, Circe, my potion. I nearly went off. Lupin leaned against Stormframe, appearing completely overwhelmed. Harry found that he cared very little for the drama unfolding inside his professor's head. I'll go then. He left without waiting for permission. The rest of the evening passed in a blur for Harry. He avoided other people's company, dimly feeling it was much better to practice hexes and curses on furniture in an abandoned classroom. He lost track of time but didn't care. Compared to his humiliating defeat at Black's Hand, a detention for breaking curfew was nothing. Harry didn't get caught, though. He snuck back into his dormitory when everyone was fast asleep, and tried to calm his racing thoughts. He fell into slumber, still concocting plans on how to get better and stronger, and better and stronger, and... The next day Lupin summoned him to his office. Harry went, not knowing what to expect. Lupin looked exhausted, even worse than last night, which was saying something. He smiled weakly when Harry presented himself at his office. "Do you come in, Harry?" he said, waving towards a chair before his desk. "I'm sure that after yesterday evening, well, you must have questions, and it seems I owe you some answers." Feeling somewhat blank, Harry sat and accepted a cup of tea, which smelled of some herbs. "Answers, Professor?" Anger and confusion warred within Harry when he recalled last night, but it hadn't yet occurred to him that Lupin might have an explanation that would make him feel better. Then again, Lupin didn't look like a man bursting with good news, so perhaps making Harry feel better was not on the agenda. "Yes, Harry, I'm afraid I've not been entirely forthright with you. Not through any ill intentions, I assure you, but—" The teacher sat heavily on his chair behind the desk. "I don't suppose it matters now, but after yesterday there is no more question of shielding you from the unpleasant truth." Perhaps this was about making Lupin feel better then, because so far he was the only one getting anything out of the discussion. "The first and the most important thing I must say is this, Harry. It seems that we have all been awfully, dreadfully wrong. Sirius Black did not betray your parents." A ringing silence followed that statement. Harry stared at Lupin's face, trying to contain rising hysteria by focusing on which question to ask first. "Then who did?" he forced out. "Peter Pettigrew," Lupin said deliberately, like it was supposed to convey a great meaning. Harry felt something inside him give. "What is he? Another relative? My fairy godmother?" he asked, gripping his cup tightly with both hands. "And why do you know about all of this anyway? I mean, with all due respect, and everything." Lupin gave him another sad smile, sighed, and launched into a tale that was as warped as anything Harry had ever heard. Turns out, Lupin had been Harry's father's best friend, or one of, among Sirius Black and Peter Pettigrew. They'd had a grand merry time of it in Gryffindor altogether, but something had gone very wrong for them somewhere, as Pettigrew had sided with Voldemort and sold them all out. So James Potter had died, Sirius Black had gone to prison for Pettigrew's crimes, and the traitor had spent 12 years masquerading as the Weasley's rat. "And where were you, sir, while all of this was happening?" Harry couldn't help asking. "Sadly, I was as deceived as everyone else, deceived and shattered by the deaths of 2 of my friends and the betrayal of another," Lupin sighed. "I had never, even in my darkest moments, expected such a scenario. But now, everything has changed," Lupin said. "Sirius, he took no part in the murder of your parents, Harry, but he has now stained his soul with another crime. He escaped from Azkaban with the sole desire to kill Peter, and Harry, he succeeded yesterday, after he met you." "So Pettigrew is dead?" Harry asked, numb. "I'm afraid so." "Isn't that a good thing?" Harry asked, eyes narrowed, and Lupin shook his head. "Sirius succeeded in revenging himself on Peter, but by killing him he severely damaged his chances of proving his innocence." Lupin went on to explain that Dumbledore had shown Pettigrew's corpse to the minister, which had only resulted in the ministry deciding to hush everything up. The charges against Black stood, because Pettigrew's corpse proved nothing, except that he'd been alive for longer than everyone had thought. Black, having killed him, had escaped into the night, leaving only a note to the effect of, "I killed him, but not James and Lily." Lupin was now planning to search for him. "What for?" Harry asked. "Harry," Lupin said, and his voice seemed to hitch a little. "Please, I know it's going to be difficult after seeing his face all over the newspapers, and it's come as a shock for me too, but Sirius really is innocent of betraying your parents. If he'd only trusted me, if I had only believed in him, I owe him an apology, and he deserves better than the life of a fugitive." Did he? Maybe so. But just being told that the man was innocent and that another was to blame, being told in this abstracted fashion on top of all the other revelations, it did nothing to soothe Harry's anger. Black might have been innocent of the crime he'd been chucked in prison for, but Harry remembered Black's crazed eyes and his own suffocating hatred. The name Sirius Black still sent a shiver of loathing down his spine. He knew nothing of Peter Pettigrew. He'd never seen him, never heard of him before today. He had no face to attach to the name, no features to hate. But he'd seen Black, and the man had seen Harry at his weakest, had reduced Harry to his weakest. No matter what Lupin said, Harry could not forgive Sirius Black. He wasn't even sure he wanted to try. "He's your godfather, you know, Harry," Lupin said. "Yes," Harry said, "I do know that." Not that he saw how that was relevant. Black hadn't escaped from Azkaban out of godfatherly feelings after all. It was all to kill Pettigrew, apparently. Harry must have been less than an afterthought to him. Lupin drew his eyebrows. "You are angry," he observed calmly. Oh yeah, Harry was angry. He was angry with Black, and with Lupin, and with Pettigrew, and with himself, and with James Potter, who had such a shit taste in friends. A werewolf, a murderer, and a traitor. And now Lupin was sitting here, staring at Harry with those understanding eyes, as if he had any right to counsel Harry in anything. He'd given that up when he'd decided to spend the year hiding his friendship with James Potter. Harry didn't need adults or trusted authority figures, or anything. He was fine. But it stung nonetheless that Lupin hadn't even made a token effort to get to know him, or to tell him anything about his dad. Not even during the Patronus lessons every week. Lupin had been the only one of James Potter's former friends still alive, and free, and he'd never as much as contacted Harry. He'd never cared, whatever he might be indicating now. So, no, Harry wasn't buying this brand of kindness, and none of Lupin's subsequent words managed to convince him otherwise. "Parvati and I are definitely going to the World Cup this summer. I mean, how often is it held in Britain?" Padma said, sitting down in their compartment on the Hogwarts Express. "Not that I care that much about Quidditch, but indeed, not a very intellectual sport, is it?" Blaise raised an eyebrow. "The fact that I'm very clever doesn't mean I don't have fun," Padma huffed and eyed Hermione. "I like some people, of course." Hermione raised her chin high. "I'll have you know I've passed every single class on offer this year with top marks and balanced it well with my social life." "Does helping Longbottom with homework really count as a social life?" Millie asked. "Oh, lay off Longbottom, Millie," Blaise drawled. You can't help being stuck in Gryffindor. I'm sure we'd make a decent human being out of him in Slytherin." "No Longbottoms have been in Slytherin for centuries," Neville said mildly. Harry was only half listening to his friend's banter. His mind was still on the conversation with Lupin, and on everything that had not been said. Coming clean with him was all well and good, but firstly, Harry wasn't sure there weren't more secrets hiding behind Lupin's amber eyes. The man had not, after all, seen fit to mention the fact that he was a werewolf, and secondly, Harry felt that his openness had come much too late. Lupin's story was the first time any adult had officially told Harry of the whole deal with the Fidelius and the secret keepers and the like. Who'd thought it was a good idea to keep him in the dark? Lupin? Dumbledore? Who? And it had grated on him to hear Lupin talk of how everyone had doted on Harry when he was little, and how glad he was to see Harry again. And Harry hadn't necessarily wanted to hear about how different he apparently was from his dad. "I'd never expected you to be... You are so unlike James. Not just because you're a Slytherin, but you're more serious than he ever was, and..." Of course Lupin had said that Harry's dad would be proud of him, of his determination, maturity, success with the Patronus charm. But what did all this mean in the end? "Harry, seriously, wake up!" Harry shook his head and saw his friends were staring at him in amusement. Sorry guys, spaced out for a bit. You were saying?" "I was saying that we should try to meet up over the summer," Padma said, rolling her eyes. "And, oh, the food cart should be here soon. I'm craving chocolate." "I'm not paying for you again," Harry said firmly. "Why not?" Padma asked, biting her eyelashes. Hermione looked at that display with disapproval. "Your love for chocolate could drive the House of Potter into destitution," Harry told Padma. "Yep, the goblins will kick you out of Gringotts and laugh at your misery," Blaise nodded happily. "And then the Mellifluer family will prevail in their feud against the Longbottoms." "You know the Mellifluers have died out, Blaise," Harry countered. "Even in poverty the Potters shall triumph." "Why does this sound familiar?" Neville wondered, wrinkling his forehead. "That would be because Harfang Longbottom killed the last Mellifluer in battle," Blaise rolled his eyes. "How do you know?" Neville asked, surprised. "Zabina here is an aspiring historian," Millie said dryly. "Hey, history is interesting," Blaise protested. Everyone stared at him. Even Hermione looked sceptical. "Well, not the way Binns tells it, but it really is. You're just a bunch of illiterate morons." Hermione made an indignant noise, but it drowned in the cacophony of arguments. Neville was saying something about his gran and interest in herbology. Padma was claiming a long string of very literate Ravenclaws in her ancestry, and Millie was explaining why Blaise would die alone and eaten by werewolves. Harry sat back, smiled, and felt, for a fleeting moment, at peace.